Hey folks, Tom here. Back with a bonus episode of the Tabletop Tour. I am speaking to Hobby Royalty today and Andy Chambers. Had a little bit of a mishap because Andy, I think he was on his laptop or something. So hopefully, yep, he's just joined then. And yes, he can join. Andy, I have invited you in. First twice. Yeah, Berserk. Well done, mate. Chris, how you doing? Hopefully it all works. Oh, there he is!
You get to see how dirty my front camera is. Jesus Christ, look at
It's all good. Don't worry about it. The number of these I've done, Andy, where someone's phone is broken or whatever, it's fine, mate.
that.
It's all good. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm okay. A little bit wide awake, as it were, because I had to get up early for this relative to what I usually get up at. So I'm a bit like, what's going on? Oh my God.
Oh, the joys of a game designer.
Prop that up. There
Joys of a game designer. Starting late. I love it.
I'm so used to like having calls with the US where I'm in your position where it's a little later for me and earlier for them, but not quite so wildly adrift as you get with Australia. It's always, oh God, the other side of the world, literally. Crazy
literally,
stuff.
mate. Yeah, and it's I'm glad you got the memo on the red as well. I appreciate that.
No, just coincidental. Look, it's Mad Marks.
Love it.
Yeah.
I can't fault it. Andy, thank you very much for joining me, mate. Much appreciated. And you even let me create an Instagram account for you so you could do this with me. So I much appreciate it.
I acknowledge my lack of comfort with technology. So if people want to help me with that, then I always try to let them.
No, I really appreciate it. So thank you very much. So much appreciated. So I really want to start, whenever I do any of these, I always want to start at the very beginning with all the hobbyists and any guests I have on. So how did you get into game designing and how did you get into the hobby? And tell us a little bit, because I know there are younger people who will watch this back. Tell us about the Asgard Circle as well.
Well, you're accurate in that I kind of started way before Citadel Miniatures and Games Workshop, back in the 70s when I was a nipper. And 8, 9, 10 years old, started to... my dad he was into model aircraft. He used to build huge 1/6 scale gliders, actually, they were. But he was kind of a bit into military modeling. And as a kid, because I got interested in airfix figures and kits, he got me a subscription to a military modeling magazine. But within that, the Seeds of Destruction were in there because there was sci-fi and fantasy stuff in there as well, which I found far more exciting because I was a big fan of Captain Scarlet and stuff like that. I started to hook on to all that sort of stuff and got into doing a bit of fantasy gaming with Lord of the Rings rules. Was the very first thing I did, and started collecting some little armies and things. And through that, I found about a local hobby store come manufacturer, which was Asgard Miniatures at the time, which Brian Ansell kind of went on to set up Citadel after being with Asgard for a bit, so they kind of parted ways. But there were still a lot of denizens of the early lead belt scene around there, including Jez Goodwin, who was working as a designer for them at the time. No, he actually came on a year or two later, but he was fresh out of university at the time, having done quite an art degree and trying to make a living making miniatures. And it was funny because even back then he was clearly kind of a big step up. Actually, most of the Asgard designers were compared to what was around at the time, because I'll be frank, the miniatures were not great. There was the odd brilliant ones that you could get hold of, but a lot of them were really kind of ropey, they looked like they were put together out of Play-Doh or something like that. So Nick Bibby, I should mention as well, was another miniatures designer around, and Jazz actually learned a lot off of Nick because Nick had been doing it a bit longer. You don't hear of Nick Bibby these days because he does big bronze sculptures for very wealthy people and governments and things like that, of animals mostly. He always liked doing animals. So that was kind of early days, and at the time, I was like 13, 14. By the time I was like going and being the annoying kid in Asgard's store every Saturday, all the time, sort of thing, hanging on. And so I kind of picked up a lot from the people there about games and gaming and miniatures and miniature design. One of the guys there, well, a few of the guys there actually got jobs in the end working in Citadel mail order at the old Chewton Street factory in Eastwood. And when I was old enough, me and a few of the other younger guys there got recruited to come along and be mail order trolls like over the Christmas period, because they always had a massive rush on around Christmas, and they were always behind anyway with mail order, and they always aspired to try and get it out next day, but it was like you were lucky if it was next week as a rule, so they always needed more hands.
That's good.
So that was kind of like a bit of boots on the ground, on the shop floor, in the factory, running around picking up, you know, getting letters from little Johnny who wants, you know, these 9 specifically named snotlings out of the bin.
Oh.
They didn't used to get, they would get like a handful of about 18 random snotlings thrown into a bag for that. But it was that kind of stuff, because every miniature was named, you know, in the adverts and so on. So some people would write in with codes, some people would just write in with names. Some people would just say, send me 6 dwarves, you know. So I got a basic grounding in that. I did that for a couple of years running, just like over the winter season. Got smashed up in a motorcycle accident. Oops. So I was like out of things for a year. And towards the end of that, when I got mobile again, Games Workshop had sort of like come along. You know, Rogue Trader had come out a few years earlier, and I quite liked that. Okay, because it was fun, kind of knock around sci-fi. And it's a lot of the games and the rules that were around previous to that were very much sort of like obsessed with the simulation. Like, we have to make this complicated rather than playable. And 40K, even as ropey as it is when you look back on it now, was actually really, really playable by comparison. So I'd got into playing some of that. But by the time I got mobile again, Adeptus Titanicus had come out, and that absolutely fascinated me, because it was the first time I'd ever seen a game in a box, where you had miniatures, you had terrain, because this was the really early one that came with polystyrene buildings in it. You had rules, you had templates, you had dice, you had everything you needed was in the box. And that was a bit of a revelation to me, because every other game I'd played before that is like, well, you go and buy your rules from here, and you're going to need some dice, and you have to make your own templates, if there are any, and so on and so on. So that kind of package deal, I was really enthralled by it. And we played it a lot, you know, sharing a house at the time with a bunch of other guys. We used to play it like on the kitchen table, you know, around the teapot with your Titans and all this sort of stuff. And I really got into it. And I heard back from one of the guys who'd stayed on doing the mail order thing, and actually kind of graduated up to working at the studio, about, because I was going into Games Workshop this time, like buying some Bane blades and stuff like that, because they were cool too. And getting White Dwarf, because they usually had stats in it for anything that came out. And this is Adeptus Titanicus, not Space Marine, so it wasn't a given that anything that came out had stats. And there were these little one-man Titans, as they were called on the blister, that came out, what we know as Knights now. But there were no rules for them. And I heard back from Tim, who was working in the studio, that that was because Jervis Johnson had taken a 6-month sabbatical, an education about what the word sabbatical meant as well. So he hadn't been around to write the article. Nobody else knew anything about Adeptus Titanicus to write the article. So I was like, with the confidence of youth, bashed out an article. Yeah, I just wrote an article because I'd been writing like bits of rules and my own rules for years at that point. I didn't think that much of it overall. I'll say that there were so many, frankly, bad sets of rules out there that you kind of needed to make your own to a certain extent anyway. So it wasn't a big deal to write the rules. And I made really carefully kind of copied the style that they used in White Dwarf at the time. So it had little bits of color text and quotes and things like that in it and all this
Very nicely done.
And I borrowed my friend's word processor, because this is before desktop computers were a thing, or indeed phones. So yeah, physically typed it up, and mailed it, snail mail, into the studio. And they got back to me, surprisingly, and sort of said, "Oh, this is all right. Why don't you come in for a couple of weeks and finish up the article, and we'll see what's what, and then we'll think about paying you for it," sort of thing. And I was unemployed at the time, so absolutely no problem for me. I was like, "Oh yes." And I went in there, and the first thing I found was that Jervis was back already. So I was like, "Well, okay, so I'm doomed, basically. There's no job here for me because he's back. Damn it!"
Yeah.
Which didn't prove to be the case at all, as you might imagine. And the article I'd written, which while it was competent enough and so forth, they actually had a background in mind for these one-man titans, knights, feudal worlds, all that shtick. They kind of had that background there, but they didn't have the technicalities of how to write up the rules there, so they hadn't bothered. So basically, my article was in the bin. So that was an important first lesson in publication as well. So in the bin and start over, basically. With the guy who actually wrote Adeptus Titanicus there to go, nah, you should do it like this. So tremendous learning experience, and Jervis is like the nicest man in the world. He truly is. You always hear people say, "Oh, he's a real gentleman." He really is. He really genuinely is. More so than I've met a lot of people, and I think he's the most gentlemanly person that I've ever met. And he really welcomed me in and kind of taught me the basics of how to start writing rules and doing articles. And that 2 weeks turned into, "Oh yeah, we've got another White Dwarf article we need doing. Why don't you get onto that," sort of thing. And, "Oh, we've got some paste up needs doing on Realm of Chaos. Why don't you do a week on that?" And so on and so on. And just 14 years extended out, basically, from there. So that's how I got started.
It's an awesome story. How was it working? Like, you are in the name people, the sort of the people who a lot of, the current Warhammer world kind of rests on your shoulders, and along with people like Rick and Priestley and Johnson, Paul Sawyer, and all those guys, Ali as well. And so what was it like working in those early days with those guys, really developing the lore that now you see? A lot of the hard work that you guys put in is now the basis of a lot of what's going on now. So how was it working in that sort of environment, really coming up with all this new stuff? How many Back to the Coasters ideas were there that made it into?
Well, ideas that were universally unpopular never made it anywhere. Frankly, they just got shot down, and that was the end of that. One of the things.
Diplomatic, at least. Was it diplomatic, at least?
No, not at all. Not even vaguely. A slight diversion, but when I actually came out of that 14 years of being at Games Workshop, a couple of years later, I started to work at Blizzard Entertainment over in LA, working on StarCraft 2. And in terms of cultural shift, when we talked earlier about being on opposite sides of the world, if you imagine that in terms of cultural shift for a creative environment, it was kind of along those lines.
Right.
Games Workshop, when I was working there, was always very high pressure. We had a monthly magazine to produce, quite apart from anything else. And that's until you've worked in an environment where you're producing literally a publication every month that needs to be filled every month. And you have to write games and books and supplements on top of that. It was really high pressure. It was really, really busy all the time. There was never any taking your foot off the gas. And in those kind of environments, it's a lot like you see kind of like old style, like newspaper rooms, where it's just like anger and violence, stab, no, you're mad, crazy, etc. It's very, very explosive a lot of the time, which is why I know that even under times of pressure, Jervis Johnston is the greatest gentleman in the world, because he never really cracked up under those circumstances. And I saw and I participated in literal screaming matches at times about the most stupid, trivial shit. But, it was important to us at the time.
Well, it must have worked, because a lot of the systems that came out at that time are still very much beloved. And my favorite game that honestly GW ever created, you created. I'm probably most well known if I'm well known for anything in this hobby, it is doing the BFG side of things, right? You know, a lot of, you know, Necromunda, Gorka Morka, you know, I mean, Warhammer 40K, but as well as the other games that you've created, like the Starship Troopers games, Drop Fleet Commander, and Blood Red Skies you've got going on at the moment. I mean, they're all beloved sort of games. So it's interesting that, you know, out of that fire and brimstone approach, all these quality systems came out of it, you know.
Well,
under pressure.
There is a truism to it. The creative process is a crucible. You know, you have to apply some heat to it. You know, God bless them for Blizzard. It existed there too. It was just expressed in a different way. But there's always heat there. There's always fire. Because if there isn't, then you're not really being creative. One of the things that we did well, one of the things that Rick did particularly well early on was set up a universe in 40K that could have anything in it. You know, space elves riding dinosaurs, no problem. We've got a place for you. You know, fungal monsters that breed underground and swarm out and make weaponry out of junk, got a place for you. You know, mad Catholic Church crossed with the Holy Roman Empire, got a place for you. And within that sort of like bigger structure, we always knew that one of our biggest jobs within that was not to be too prescriptive about it, but to sort of say, this is the kind of thing that can happen, but hey, look, here's a weird diversion over here, and nobody ever knew what actually happened there because blah, and so on. To have more opportunities, more little doorways there, whether or not you went through them straight away, it didn't matter. It was always building out. It was, you know, building a big cathedral in which you could install
building a big sandbox in which you could play in.
Yeah, so it's kind of it's a delight to see it round out so thoroughly. Through its existence, I don't think anybody really anticipated it would ever get this far. I mean, over 100 Horus Heresy books, from what I'm told now, and all this sort of thing. So yeah, that's a great joy, and it's been it was a great experience to participate. But I do view it as being in the early stages of that, because, you know, others have taken up the work and carried on. And I mean, I was around with Bill King. He dropped off the wagon earlier than I did, but he made huge contributions early on in actually bringing decent writing and color text, and kind of like setting the bar quite high, so that when we came to write our own color text and stuff, well, it's like, well, it has to be, you know, reasonably good, like up to Bill, just below maybe Bill King standards to pass muster, really. And that meant that when I was training up the newer games developers, guys who are still there now, like Phil Kelly, you know, that was the bar that I set for them. Is like, you know, we want, you know, decent color sets, can't be rubbish and so on, and it's got to have interesting ideas in it, well expressed, la la la. So it kind of encouraged that excellence, which, despite the depravities of higher management, has persisted to this day. It's amazing the stuff that comes out of Games Workshop now, really, in terms of models and so on. It's kind of, a lot of it's stuff that I talked about with Jez Goodwin a million times over the years. So it seems like the Adeptus Mechanicus coming out, and it's really nice to see it given form at last.
I was going to talk about Jez, because obviously his sketches are, I mean, classic in the hobby. And what was it like getting his, you know, here's a sketch I've made, here's an idea. How did you then develop that into, I've got to somehow take this off the page, and then, and the same with the models, I suppose, create a game with it. What, like, how was that experience? Because Jez is like a mythical character to a lot of,
because, well, he should be, because, you know, he is like the driving force behind so much of the design at Games Workshop, that distinctive look. A lot of people give credit to John Blanche for the art, and that just set the sort of tone and so on. When it comes to actually rendering it onto the tabletop, you know, a lot of that comes from Jez. You know, other designers have contributed a lot over the years, but he always had a really, and honestly, going all the way back to Asgard Miniatures days when he was there, these two rangers while he was there, one of orcs and one of dwarves. And it was one of the first times that you'd seen kind of like like a development across a whole range, where there were like little sneaky scout orcs with bows, and there were big burly soldier orcs, and there was stuff in between and so on. And there was like a logical progression to it all, and it kind of all fit together thematically. Same with dwarves. And he brought that concept of sort of like having a range of miniatures, not just individual miniatures, but how they all fit together as a group, to thinking about stuff at Games Workshop as well. So he always had this good feel for like families of miniatures. And the point I'm making about this is when it came around to doing like Battlefleet Gothic, there was a really clear aesthetic in the kind of ships that he'd designed and done sketches for, of like, you know, this sort of steam train crossed with a sort of galleon crossed with an ironclad look. And that, when you look at it in terms of making a game, that gives you a start point. You know, these things look like that, so they should kind of fight like that, shouldn't they? You know, they shouldn't be super slick, you know, high speed, infinite energy kind of creations. It should be more like Space Battler Jutland, which is the model I took for trying to create Battlefleet Gothic. Now, back when I started at the studio, GW Studio, back in 1990, Richard Halliwell was still there, the guy who designed Space Hulk. And Space Hulk had been a tremendous success, and he was trying to come up with a follow-on game, another sort of like board game, which is what the original Battlefleet Gothic was intended to be. Those kind of like spearhead-shaped cruisers that you'll sometimes see.
Yeah.
They date back to then. The Eldar ships with the sails, the plastic ones of those, which later saw use in Space Fleet and various other places. They go all the way back to them. And there've been artwork done and all kinds of stuff. But the game it produced used one of the absolute banes of all game systems, as far as I'm concerned, which is vector movement, you know, where I'm going in this direction, and now I have to slip round and put thrust in to go in proper Newtonian physics, basically, like it should be in space. But it makes for a horrible gaming experience. I knew this because I've been playing Encounter 1, which is a tabletop rule set which used vector movement. So I'd spent a few years trying to play games of this because I really liked spaceships. I was really into them. And Encounter 1 had a design your own spaceship sort of game, mini game to it, where you actually like laid out where your guns were and what pieces you had on your ship.
I feel that I need to find and play this game. I feel, Andy. I think this is right up my alley. Apart from maybe the vector thing, but well, maybe I'll have to find out about that afterwards.
Very, very old set of rules. Very old set of rules. I still have my copy around somewhere. Anyway, so I played around with vector movement, and it didn't work. Basically, his game didn't work, and eventually it got abandoned. Apart from Space Fleet coming along to make some use of the models that have been made for it, and so on and so on. Yeah. But you know, I was hanging out with Jez all the time, and I'd seen his sketchbooks for all these amazing Imperial cruisers that he'd started doing around that time. And I was like, well, we've got to do this game. Look at it, it's cool. It just looks cool, man. So I set about, just on my own time, trying to design a spaceship game for Battlefleet Gothic, and the early effort was like a card-driven, which was kind of ahead of its time, really. I mean, it might work better now, but I came to the realization that I hadn't got really any experience in designing card-driven games. So what I did was I basically converted Space Marine / Epic 40,000 into a spaceships game. Was the core idea behind it. And once I sort of like approached it from that direction, it all became very easy because it was something that at that point I'd been doing for years. Because I'd done all the Space Marine supplements, and just a ton of stuff for Space Marine by that point. Yeah, and I say we were literally working on another edition of it and all this kind of stuff. So I was very au fait with that language. So, you know, recreating a spaceship game using that as a sort of core mechanic was fine. And lifting the various other things like the order dice and stuff like that out of Epic was, as it turns out, the right way to do it. Or at least it produced a satisfying game which gave you Space Battle of Jutland, which is what the intent was in the first place. And has remained popular, to my surprise, to this day. It's having quite the resurgence, really. It seems like at the moment because of 3D printing, so people can make their own ships.
It's very much having a bit of over the past couple of years, very much having a resurgence. And I was going to ask you about that, but I think you have mentioned. I'm going to jump a little bit, but I'm going to I'm a little bit biased because it is my favorite game and I love it. But you have described it in the past as being sort of your magnum opus, BFG. So, firstly, I'm going to throw it out there. What was your favorite fleet that you created? I've got to ask you that first off the bat.
I'm sorry, I missed
and then I'll go into proper questions. So,
sorry, say again about the fleet. What fleet was that?
What was your favorite fleet that you created?
Oh, okay. Probably the Imperials. Actually, I played Orcs a lot, but actually that's because I found it too easy playing with Imperials. But is
that why you made the Orcs so hard to play with? Is that why you made the Orcs difficult to play with? Is that what he did?
I think I overdid it actually because I found them difficult to play with as well. So that's why I had to invent rocks basically, so I could win games.
So hang on, Andy. You made the game so difficult for Orcs, even for your own creator, that you had created more rocks, right? I'm going to have to tell people that story because that's amazing. That's fantastic. But I suppose I needed to get that out of the way because Imperial Fleet is my favorite fleet as well. But what made BFG the game that you consider your best work? What is it about BFG that makes it that for you?
It's a nice, tidy, complete package. If you take the rule book, it's got the 4 main fleets in it. It's got a nice selection of scenarios, set of rules that works, sort of thing, bunch of different ships. And, you know, we managed to create all of that out of sort of like whole cloth, basically, and add a big chunk into the Warhammer 40,000 universe in one go. And it went really smooth. And realistically, it was the first game that I'd produced to a large extent. The previous ones, like things like Necromunda and Gorka Morka, had come down on a high. We're doing this sort of game. In both cases, like Rick did the core systems for them, and then I kind of like wrote them up and wrote the supporting systems for it. So it was all sort of first time of being completely at the helm for designing the game. And working with Gav Thorpe, he did a tremendous job on the Chaos side of things because he mainly designed the Chaos fleet. And we designed them to be really complementary to each other to make an interesting fight. That was the whole point about having broadside firepower predominate on both sides, but with an option to sort of like break the line for the Imperial side. But conversely, you know, on paper, when you look at the Chaos ships, they're a lot stronger than the Imperial ships. And that works so well to this day. I'm really, really proud of it. A tremendous piece of work, I think, that came together. But a lot of that was through testing. We tested the hell out of it. I managed to get an early draft of it into White Dwarf and get feedback from people on that as well, which was really useful. Because this is kind of pre-internet days. We're talking about, what, 96, 97, somewhere around there. So just even getting people to, like, you know, read a magazine article and write into you about what they thought about things was really invaluable feedback and not something we often got the option of on designing a game. So that was really good as well. Made it very clear how important carriers were in people's minds. Because I was designing Space Battle of Jutland, so it didn't really have a lot of fighters or anything like that in it at the time. But it was evidently very, very clear that people really wanted, you know, because Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica and stuff like that, filled, packed to the gunnels with, you know, space fightery goodness. So there was obviously an expectation there to do more with that. So we did. So yeah, I was just really, really proud of the way it turned out. Miniatures were great, gameplay great. People really liked it.
They are great. I'm not going to lie. There's always one in my house near me, Andy, so it's fine. So, with regards, with BFG, I mean, it stands up, in my view, and I would say in the community very, very well still, because there's still arguments within the BFG community. I know the niche within a niche here, but there's still arguments about using your original rules in the Blue Book and Armada, and then I mean, the community has gone and created more fleet lists and ships and adjusted rules and new rules and all that. But there's arguments with, well, that's all well and good, but the original is still better. So how do you feel about, firstly about that, but also how do you feel about when people take those rules and kind of run with it? And how do you, it's your baby that's you consider great, but.
I've been doing this now for over 30 years, writing stuff professionally, getting paid for it to get it published. And I've long since had to come to grips with the fact, because whenever you create something, you put something of yourself into it, you know, it's yours. And you're putting it together to show to the world and go like, look at this thing I made. But you have to, particularly with rule sets, get over that, frankly. Once it's published, it doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to the world. Yeah. And if they want to do something different with it, if they want to say, actually, that rule is terrible and change it, then that's their prerogative, you know? They paid money to buy this thing, and they are the ones putting the energy into playing the game. So I take a very kind of like, good for you guys. You go for it. You know, you do what makes you happy, attitude with the rules. Obviously, it hurts a bit that you got it wrong in the first place, or that this, as it often is, this group of people feels you got it wrong. But people are different as well, and players look for different things in games, and you have to accept house ruling stuff is a perfectly valid way of going ahead. And with a game as old as Battlefleet Gothic, then just rewriting the damn rule book to more modern standards is perfectly valid as well. You know, it's not sacred texts at the end of the day. And were I to do it now, I would do it differently, because games designers moved on. And, you know, I have moved on in what I think of as being good games design, so I would do it differently now anyway. So I can't blame anybody else for wanting to change it. I can also appreciate people who like the simplicity of, no, we're just going to use the blue book as it is, warts and all, even if some things aren't great. You know, we all know where we're at with that, and it's the way we used to play, and there's kind of good nostalgia value in that too. Yeah. There's something to be said for that too. I play some games like that as well, where you know that there's issues with the game, but you just play it as it is, because that was the game you played X number of years ago, and that's kind of as much the point, is scratching that itch as anything. So.
You make a valid point about how games designs obviously change on, and you would be much more well versed at describing that than I ever will be. But you created Dropfleet Commander as well, which a number of people have. I don't know if you said this, but I know a lot of people in the community said it's kind of BFG 2.0. What were the? Firstly, is that true? But then, secondly, what are the aspects of that game that you could, bring the aspects from BFG, the lessons learned, and sort of develop that into a more complete space game?
Yeah, I have described it as BFG 2.0 myself, because it does embody a lot of the ideas that I was thinking in terms of for potentially doing a 2.0 version of BFG, because you always think about stuff like that, or stuff comes to you about things like that. So, and it's another spaceship game at the end of the day, and I do like spaceship games. So it's a good one. In many ways, it's a lot slicker. It handles things a lot more smoothly, particularly in the targeting department, in that basically you get a number of attack dice and the target tells you what your target number is to hit it, which incorporates things and There's a chance that you can bypass armor and all so forth, all done with relatively few dice rolls. So that's a lot slicker than BFG is. The activation system is a lot more modern than BFG. There's none of this sort of like, now I get to unleash my entire fleet upon you, and then you get to fight me back with whatever you've got left. There's none of that, because it's got a proper alternate activation system, but a cunning way of handling it by basically using squadrons, which was always something I kind of wanted more for BFG, but couldn't really institute at the time. So that one's good as well. So there's aspects about it that are very good. There are aspects about it that are actually worse, where, you know, clearly I didn't learn and put old bad ideas back in, or did them badly. Things like the catastrophic damage is overblown in Dropfleet Commander, and the crippling damage as well, if I'm honest. They're both overdone. So there's too much emphasis on that part of the equation in combat. What BFG does really, really well is presenting you with this giant slab of metal with guns in it that you can shoot holes in it. But past a certain point, it's kind of not as effective as it was, and there's less point in shooting it now, and you kind of want to move on to other targets. And BFG does that really, really well. And Drop Fleet Commander doesn't. Drop Fleet Commander actively rewards you for blowing shit up all the time. So you clean things up. And that kind of takes away from it a little bit. You don't get that kind of drifting, almost Hulk, sliding out of the edge of the combat, desperately trying to repair things and all that sort of stuff, which to me is a key part of spaceship battles. Is you should have moments like that. Maybe the guy gets away, maybe he comes back and makes an important contribution at the last minute, something like that. Don't really get that.
I'm going to appreciate that narrative aspect to what you're saying there, Andy, because it's one of the things that I think a lot of, I play a lot of BFG, quite frankly. A lot of people ask me to help teach them rules here in Sydney and things, and it's great, and I love it. But a lot of those aspects come across, and a lot of it's one of those interesting, the newer gamers, where, especially with some of the newer 40K stuff, you kind of put your models down and you kind of take it off again because things get shot to shit very quickly. Whereas in BFG, there's this feeling that they are, like you say, solid lumps of metal, and they can take a hit.
Yes.
And can keep going for a bit, and it lasts a bit longer, sort of thing.
Yes.
That narrative aspect, I think, is very popular still.
Yeah, it's very strong in BFG, and I don't feel it's as strong in Drop Fleet Commander. Drop Fleet Commander is a great game. It's a really interesting game. It's very focused because it does revolve around, getting shit onto the planet's surface and so on. And that gives it an interesting dimension. It's got a little bit three-dimensionality to it, which I think is very good as well. But the kind of narrative, so it's a great fleet game in a way, whereas BFG is a great ships game. BFG is a game where you name your ships and you care about them individually and all that sort of stuff. And Drop Fleet Commander, not so much. It's more of a modern style of game, consciously so, where it is that thing of like, yes, they've been spotted now. Blip, they're all gone, sort of thing. Deadly weapons with, unmeasurable ranges because we're in space, so all I've got to do is detect you to attack you and all this sort of stuff. It works on different principles. So it makes an interesting kind of fleet battle game. But that being said, one of the problems of what I found when I played Drop Fleet Commander a lot was that it's an interesting fleet game, and yet you've got all this ground stuff going on as well. So it's almost kind of got too many things going on. And focus on individual ships and amongst all of that is it's just impossible, really.
Yeah.
Whereas, like I say, the BFG does a very, very good job of like, oh no, this is my righteous endeavor with Captain Argon Flark, and we're going to make it through this game, And one of the little side things that we did very well, almost without thinking about it, really, or not appreciating how much of an impact it would have, was in terms of victory points. If you get crippled and piss off, you actually save a load of victory points from going to the enemy. If you hang around and get blown up, you lose them. So it encouraged good play on that front of like creeping off and escaping with your life was a valid move in the game. Whereas actually the amount of effort to have finished somebody off would often exceed the value in doing it in a tactical sense at the time. So
it's one of the things that we noted a lot of gamers were like, oh, if I try and keep your aim is to keep the ships alive, guys. It's not like rush them in and let them die thing. It's keeping your mentality. Like the ship is worth more. Like imagine in real life, you wouldn't let a ship sail into mines and things like that. The ship is worth more. You let it go and for a tactical withdrawal, and it's one of the major things we all love about it. Yeah, especially so. Yeah.
Yeah, well, because it was built off of reading a lot of Royal Navy history in general, and just naval history in general, where ships are important things. They've got a lot of guys in them. There's a big investment in money and time in the ship itself. So losing a ship to win a battle is not always actually a win.
Yeah.
And we tried to build a little bit of that into the victory point system, which worked out, as it turns out. And it actually gives it a lot of flavour So I didn't really think about it or appreciate how much impact that would have at the time, but it's very much a factor. And it's a great thing when you read people's, battle reports or whatever they put on social media, how often that comes up. Like, I managed to get away with this ship, and so blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh, yeah, that was actually really smart. That and brace for impact is actually the other big thing of giving you that option to say, you know what, I don't care if I'm a bit less effective in the future if I can stop some damage happening right now. And that's a really key decision point. And it has that ripple effect on the game and how well units survive. And how much you think those offensive and defensive pieces.
Sorry. I was just going to say, it has an unintended consequence, and also, so that you mentioned alternate activations earlier with Battlefleet. The you go, I go system can sometimes in certain games feel like I'm not doing anything for ages.
Yes.
But that active decision making that I've got to brace for impact keeps you invested, because you've got to keep your attention span. I'm like, am I going to make this decision, or am I going to reload my ordnance next turn? It's
yes.
like, oh, decisions.
Yeah, which was one of the main reasons I put it in the first place, was to, as you say, keep you engaged, so that you had to watch what's going on. Damn, I had a good point to follow that up with. He's gone now. Clearly wasn't that good.
No, good. Talking about all these rules and everything like that, I did want to ask you though. You have created a hell of a lot of games, right? And a lot of quite a lot, right? So, what is the process? Is it a similar process for all these games, or is it different? In producing game systems, do you have a select process, and do you have any tips on anyone looking to want to get into that industry, or even make their own homebrew stuff?
I think the biggest first thing I always look at is, well, in fairness, games come in two different varieties for me. One is where people come to you and say, we want to write a game about X. We've got these things we want to incorporate into it. This is the general idea. In which case, what you're trying to do is write a game that's kind of faithful to that concept. Whether it's a giant robot fighting game or, a hunting game or whatever, it should feel like giant robots fighting or hunting in its nature. So you immediately start to sort of categorize certain kinds of mechanics that will work better with the kind of game that it will be. You think about how many pieces people have to play with. And a piece can be a unit of troops, because all a unit of troops is one piece with an incremental step damage policy to it. So, or it can be a single large model, or kind of anything in between. The point being, the human brain handles up to about 12 things well. If you start getting a force, a normal force, much above that, it starts to become a struggle for one person to handle. So you've kind of got some upper parameters right there. A lower parameter of you want to have at least 3 things to handle, because otherwise it's not much of a game. Unless it's a learning game, in which case 2 is okay. He said, desperately covering his ass for Battlefleet Gothic, where we used to teach cruisers. No comment. The thing is that cruisers in Battlefleet Gothic are quite complex individual units with a lot of options. So that's my excuse there.
We'll say.
So you kind of got some upper and lower bounds. And within that, I say it's trying to come up with mechanics that will be most faithful to the kind of game that you're trying to portray, whether it be a fleet game, mythic fantasy combat game, or whatever. You want to have stuff that makes it feel right for that. And feel's a really difficult thing to measure up to. All you can do is look for things that make it feel right and trust your instinct on that one. The other kind of game that I end up designing, very, very rarely, is one where I have an idea of what I want, and I'm kind of working towards design that from the ground up, where it's more kind of mechanically oriented. BFG falls into this category.
Yeah.
Nobody asked me to design a BFG game. I did it myself because I wanted to, and my first effort, like I said, the card game didn't really work, or I didn't have enough knowledge on how to do that. So I designed something in a system I was competent in, and actually it worked. But within that, I tried to look for ways of applying mechanics, things like brace for impact, that would give it more of that kind of flavour of Space Battle of Jutland, the way torpedoes work, stuff like that. Yeah. So, and that's once you've got your core mechanics working, this is kind of frilly bits you put on the outside to make it look better and feel better as a game. You know, they're not essential mechanically, but they're just nice pieces of flair that help to show what the fundamentals of the kind of game you're designing is. So beyond that, a lot of it comes down to breaking it down and trying to, I mean, obviously when you design a game, you design it holistically, but you have to actually put it together in chunks. You have to think about initiative is one thing. You have to think about movement, combat. These are other things. Morale, if you have it, that's another thing. So yeah, you can effectively split those up. And the reason that you might want to do that rather than looking at it holistically at first is, and I've done this in the past, if you design a whole game from the top down and then find that some of it's not working properly, you end up having to really tear it apart to get the bits out and change them over. So in the early stages, you almost want it to be like modularized, of like, well, that's an initiative problem, so we'll look at the initiative for that. That's a combat problem, so we'll look at the combat for that. Because there can be a tendency to mash everything together. And the other thing is making too many changes at once, where you change several systems to try and fix something, and you actually overcompensate and create a new problem instead. So it's staying out of traps like that. Yeah, is quite important.
Is it easier? You mentioned about the IP and all that. Is it easier when you get given an IP and then you get to kind of take it, or is it like you've done fantasy and sci-fi, or is it easier to go with a historical setting because it's not an IP as such; it's historical. So is it? I mean,
well,
I assume there's a lot of
research in its own right. It's the fiercest IP in many ways because it's real. Yeah, there can be no doubt or equivocation about reality.
Very true. People were arguing on forums the other day about the colors of bricks. So you're right. True. Yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah, well, after running Blood Red Skies, which is a historical game, it's a historical World War II fighter combat game. So you might imagine, I've got a shelf full of books. In fact, I can show you. There we go. A shelf full of books. A lot of which are about World War II aerial combat, which I have read, and I knew a fair bit about it. But oh boy, do I know nothing, as the internet can teach you fairly quickly. Yes, historically is a harsh mistress. Generally, it's easier if there's an established IP. Is the short answer to your question, because, like I say, making a game out of something is always about trying to generate a feeling. So if there's an established IP, then you've already got an example of what that feeling should be like. If there isn't an established IP, you're trying to generate it from the ground up, which can be done, just takes a bit longer, basically. And the biggest problem with that is you'll come onto a project with a client or something like that, and they'll say, we could do anything. And that's usually not true, because we can't do anything. Actually, we have a limited number of pieces that we can supply for the game. They've got to be of a limited size. We know now from experience that certain sizes don't work very well and probably won't sell as well. So, if you want to go 15 mil or 6 mil or what have you, be aware less people will buy your toys and all this sort of stuff. So there's actually, we could do anything is always a lie because it's not true. Plus, most people who say that, they actually have something they want to do. They're just waiting for you to find it. So you need to start digging into that and find out what it is they actually want to do, rather than finding it through 1,000 incremental attempted changes along the way that come later, as they try and pull it back to what they actually want, which they never bothered to tell you. Well, it's not that they didn't bother to tell you. They didn't have the confidence to tell you, because a lot of people lack confidence in their own ideas. Sometimes with good.
Is it the most challenging aspect then? Is that when you're trying to develop a game then? Is that the most challenging aspect when when a client is like, "Not really, go for it. See what you come up with."
Yes, I'd much rather have strong direction than that, because the limitations that you place on something are what actually makes it move faster. I use the simile of the mill race, you know, where you channel the stream down a little narrow channel, it moves faster, so you can turn the water wheel. It's that kind of thing. So you do need, you know, boundaries and restrictions on what you can achieve, because then you can excel in the areas that you have got some capability of excelling in, instead of just flailing around in the morass for an extended period of time. So
yeah, it's the thought of so I haven't had an opportunity to speak to games designers in reality, and it's like it's the process of thinking about it, and it's how long does, I know Gulka Walker took very little time in general terms, like 10 weeks or something like that it was to create, but generally how long do the game do you get given? You're like, is it months, years? What do you get given for it? Like,
you can write a game in about 3 months. Ideally, you should write a game and then basically work with it and sit on it and think about it for about a year, in my opinion. Obviously, most clients, most publishers don't have that latitude.
Yeah.
You know, that was an indulgence that I got from working at Games Workshop Studio for 14 years, meant it was possible to do that. Working as a freelancer for years meant that it was possible to like come up with Blood Red Skies in 2010 and not publish it until 2018, I think it was. We've got to do before it actually got published, because I was looking for somebody to publish it, which is unusual for me to have to do that, and you know, B, there was kind of no pressure. It wasn't designed to be published per se. It was designed for my own entertainment. It just happened to really work well, and people really liked it. So
we have people playing it here, gotta tell you, here in Sydney. So
it's a great game. It's I say, I do still view BFG as being my magnum opus, my magnificent octopus, but Blood Red Skies is right up there. Mechanically, it's the most elegant game I've written. So yeah, I'm quite proud of that.
It's a good game. I know several people in our community here are really enjoying it. So it's a toss-up between going for that or boo, bag the Hun. So I mean, it's just we won't talk about that then. Don't worry.
I feel confident that the natural superiority of Blood Red Skies will eventually over bag the Hun.
You appreciate you beat them in a dogfight, is what you're saying. I think that's. I'll be confident there. My mate here, so Double Fight Base Fantastic Gas, actually beat me to a question. I was going to say, so Christy, what's your favorite BFG ship in the fluff? In the lore that you've basically created. What's your favorite ship that you've basically created?
Right at the start of doing BFG, I did like an example ship to try and show the sort of size of ship I had in mind and what they might look like when you made a model out of one. I did a mock-up model, which I called the Righteous Endeavour. And that's my favourite ship to this day. You've doubtless seen a photo of it somewhere. It's more or less what for a class battleship ended up looking like, but it's skinnier than that because I had to build it on a lollipop stick. But Jez supplied me with a few parts for that he made and got cast and so forth. So it was a bit of a team effort, sneaky team effort. And that remains my favourite ship because it was kind of like very iconic for me at the time. It helped to start the whole process. It gave me something where I could show, and I can't emphasize enough the value of being able to show people like pictures or models over, oh, hey, if you just read these like 64 pages of text, you'll know all about it. For big crap, you know, you can't beat a picture or a model in the first place. So it did a great job of helping to sell the idea in general and get it, you know, on the rails for publications. So yeah, I always remember the Righteous Endeavour. It's in here somewhere in one of these boxes. So it will.
Well, I was going to say, do you have some of your old? Do you still have a lot of your ships? I know. I would be remiss not to ask you this because a friend of mine here loves Skaven.
Oh yeah.
And I know I'm well. I know about your third edition Skaven army. He tells me about it quite often. Do you still have it?
Yeah. Okay. Let's take a little walk. I moved at the end of 2019, so I'm still here. We are 18 months later, trying to sort my office out. Yeah, can't really see this at all. See this big blue stack here?
Yeah, yeah, big blue boxes. Yep.
That's all my armies. That's got my Skaven army in it, my old Chaos army, various other bits and pieces. So they're all here. They're all here. As are my old BFG ships and my old Orc ships as well. But finding storage for them and actually unpacking them all is still a distant dream at the current time.
It's nice to know that one of the most famous people in our hobby still has them all in boxes like that and hasn't put them on display yet. I'm okay with that. It makes me feel
outrageous, isn't it? It's like when we were moving in here, I was like, oh, you know what? I could finally get some like glass cabinets and put my armies on display. Did it happen? No. Did I end up with boxes in my room that come from other rooms in the house that are still here a year and a half later? Yes. And so on and so on. So yeah, it's all a dreadfully human tale of great gold, lacking competence.
I think you're literally saying what 90% of us in the hobby are like. Cause I've got boxes here as well that you can't see. That I think my wife wants me out of the living room very quickly, but you know, you do.
It's the eternal problem. It is the eternal problem. But you know, what am I going to do? Sell it? No, it's mine. Give it away?
If you ever
no, I'm still alive.
If you ever choose to sell it, I want first dibs. By the way, Andy, like that is, you immediately hit me up.
If I were to get rid of it, it's God intended to be an auction. So
I will be most upset if you decided to sell your orcs and your Imperial fleet. I'd be like, oh, I'd be a bit sad.
Yeah, well, me too. You know, I wouldn't like to part with them, to be honest, because yeah, it represented an important part of my life, and you know, I'm actually quite proud of the Orc fleet. It's really cute, and the Imperial fleet's all right. It's a bit small, truth be told, my Imperial fleet, because it's one of these classic situations where when you design a game, you end up mocking up models and putting stuff together for it. So you've kind of got a somewhat ramshackle but extant force when the game comes out with all the gorgeous models, and it's like, now, do you want to recollect all of the stuff you collected in order to test this game in the first place, or do you let it go and move on to the next thing? And I did recollect a number of Imperial ships and so on, but not quite as many as I had in the old selection of Space Fleet ships and various other things like lashed to get together to represent the Imperials.
I'm not sure whether I should be pleased that I have a larger Imperial fleet than the creator, or that I'm upset that the creator can't get enough Imperial ships. I'm not sure what I'm.
It's by no means unusual for you to have a bigger collection than me on that front. Believe me, I've seen it happen 1,000 times since then. So yes,
I'm very glad that you still got stuff, and I'll be very pleased to tell my mate that you still have your Skavens as well. He'll be most pleased with it.
Yeah, with the exception of 5 of them that are weirdly enough on secondment to a museum in Finland at the moment, because Thomas Prunen got together with them, and they've basically got like a Warhammer-y come Mordheim setup there, and he asked if I had some Skaven I could lend to them, so they're actually residing in a museum. Belongs in a museum.
I like that. That's good. That's really good. Would you give any? So if G-Dubs, because obviously Warhammer World has museum, would you hand over a few of your Imperial ships or Orc ships if they asked you? We want to display it in Warhammer World.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah,
they've got more than enough stuff in Warhammer World, though. Frankly, they don't need my ropey old miniatures. Apart from perhaps as an example of how far we've come, you know.
Well, the ships still stand up, quite frankly. I mean, I'm biased, but you know, it is what it is.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. I was referring more to my painting skills.
We're all on that one. Everyone improves there, but you know, it's all good. talking about history and all that, I wanted to find we're coming rapidly to the end of our chat, which is very disappointing for me. That's gone very quickly. But I wanted to ask about what's the future hold for you moving forward. Any more Blood Red Skies in the works, or any other games you could tell us about?
Yeah, Blood Red Skies. It's an ongoing game that I do with Warlord Games. They actually license it from me. I actually own Blood Red Skies. Excitingly enough, it's the one game that I actually own. And we've had a big delay over the course of the last 18 months, 2 years, because guess what? Global pandemic and international shipping shortage and all the rest of it. Despite that, much delayed, we've got a new starter set coming out for Blood Red Skies. Hopefully a bit later this year. For the first one was for Battle of Britain. The new one is going to be Battle of Midway.
Oh, cool.
Lends itself really well to some excellent, tabletop aerial battling as you try and sink those carriers. So that's on its way, and a load of stuff for the Pacific, because the game's really taken off. It's despite having hardly any releases for the last 12 months, it's still maintaining its popularity. There's a number of 3D printers producing planes for it. Warlord itself produces actually quite a wide range of planes at this point, and they've started moving over to resin cast planes, and they do some hard plastic ones that are excellent as well. So that's an ongoing concern. Midway will be the big hit for it. We've got some other sort of supplementary stuff, cards and so on coming out. New aces, new planes, much excitement for that. So that's going on. I've been working on a set of games also with Warlord covering 2000 AD comic book titles. So we did Strontium Dog, we did Judge Dredd, and our most recent one that's coming up now that's going through production, so Lord knows when that will come out, but it's Slain. So that's some mythical head-biting, axe-wielding barbarian stuff, which is quite fun. Working with Gav again, which is a great pleasure. It really is. We've got into a good rhythm now.
He is on Instagram, and I have been checking out what Gav's been up to, because I mean he's a prolific writer as well. So
this is it. He has a real job where he writes novels and so forth, but he still likes to indulge a little bit in doing some games design and so on. It's a set of skills, and we know each other quite well, so we work together really well, and it's a real pleasure. So they're fun games, and we're actually working on a fourth 2000 AD game together at the moment, but we'll just talk about Slain for now, since that's the exciting new development on that front. And Strontium Dog and Judge Dredd, they've both gone down really well. Been very pleased with that. I've got another client I'm doing a tabletop game for at the moment, which is kind of post-apocalyptic skirmish game, for want of a better terms. That's in development. Got another client that I'm working on another tabletop game for, which is kind of more sci-fi, big stompy robot-y type stuff. So that's a lot of fun too. Those are all those two kind of Lord knows, a few years away. Actually, maybe less, maybe more. It depends. So stuff's still going on, and I also do work on digital games when I can get it, because it's insanely well paid compared to doing tabletop work. So
yes, I know you worked on StarCraft too, didn't you? So yeah,
and Necromunda Hive Wars, I think it is, that's out at the moment by Rogue Factor. Wrote the script for that a few years back now, well before the game came out, but it keeps my hand in, and it's fun actually. It's very different. It's kind of the same but different working on digital games. So it's a good discipline, and it's a real growth industry. So I always try and take that work when I can get it. I did some stuff for Warframe at the tail end of last year, and I've been helping a few other companies over the years, just developing world building and IP, story writing, that kind of stuff. Because obviously my games design skills are absolutely no use in that environment. But the world building and IP stuff is the same. It's the same set of problems. It's the same set of answers as a rule of thumb. You just have more tools, basically, for doing world building with digital games than you have with ones that involve physical media. So,
Mm.
if anything, it's a bit easier.
Yeah.
Easy is the
I
wrong
mean,
term. There's more
yeah,
opportunities.
I think you have more opportunities to do a few things with that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the thing that really excited me getting to work on StarCraft 2 and stuff. It wasn't just about words in a line, you know, it was actually the things about, you know, physical lighting effects, animation, sounds, and stuff like that. You know, you actually get the whole package, as opposed to, right, I am now going to use these words to put images into your head. And sounds too, if I'm really feeling confident, and so on. So yeah. But a lot of the same sort of thing about,
plenty to look forward to then.
Say again?
Plenty to look forward to coming from you, sir. So I mean, I wasn't expecting like a full like, I was like, oh, okay, he's quite busy then. So it's, yeah.
As a freelancer, you always try and stay quite busy because you never know when stuff will drop out, and you know, and things always take a long time as well. You know, I'm talking about 2 unannounced, 3 unannounced tabletop games there. Maybe we'll see one of them this year. I doubt it, personally. I know the client wants to do it this year, but we'll see. Because in my experience, they take longer than that. Not for any particular reason, but it's just many parts have to all like move in conjunction to produce an end product. And before you know it, like I say, Midway for Blood Red Skies has been delayed for more than 18 months.
You're going to do that too at some point, right?
I can't read
do
that.
As well at some point? Yeah?
I can't read that. You can.
Damn it. You're going to do BFG 2.0 at some point too, right? That's just another one of you just on the cards. Yeah?
No, I imagine that Games Workshop will do that for themselves, actually, much like they did with Necromunda. And, you know, you'll get a modernized version of it, which will be cool. And I will be a little sad, but there you go. You know, I can't expect to hold on to BFG forever.
Even if they do produce a new one, I know from first-hand experience that a lot of the people in the community will continue to enjoy the original, quite frankly. So
yeah, it's well established by this point. It must be said, yes.
Certainly will. I don't think you have any fear on that one. It's a much loved game, and I think a lot of people will continue to enjoy. So yeah.
It is really one of the things that delights me about it. Is people love it so much, even after all this time. You know, that's one of the reasons it's my Magnificent Octopus as well.
I want to end it on that. Just Magnificent Octopus. That's what we're going to leave it on. Andy, mate, thank you very much for joining. I've got to end it there. I've got to end an hour, but I much appreciate you coming on, talking to me. I had 4 or 5 pages of topics that I could have talked to you about, and I think I got through 1 page. So if you ever want to chat again, please let me know. I would love to have you on, and I'm sure the community, I mean, they would love to hear from you.
Okay. Well, we'll try and make it happen again. Now we've done the technology thing, it's not so scary. So
I'm holding you to that. But to finish off, though, I just want to say thank you very much for creating my favorite tabletop game.
Believe me, it's been my pleasure, my absolute pleasure to do so.
Thank you very much for coming to the chat as well. It's much appreciated, guys. I know a lot of people were looking forward to hearing from you, Andy, so I'm glad people enjoyed it. So thank you very much, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Say goodbye for now. Bye.